New this hour, investigators tell us they also plan to commit more murders.
This is a story that will leave no one indifferent. This is a story that will make your blood run cold. In a small, quiet town, where everyone knew everyone, no one could have predicted the horrors that would unfold there. What began as a seemingly innocuous day turned into a chilling tale of betrayal, greed, and violence. The perpetrators' motives were as twisted as their methods, fueled by a strange mixture of love, rage, resentment, and a thirst for freedom. The first victims were chosen not for wealth or power, but because they simply stood in the way. Their crimes were horrific and insidious, leaving a trail of destruction that stained everything they touched. The police found scenes more horrific and shocking than they had ever seen. However, what shocked the police most was not only the cruelty, violence, or inhumanity, but also the complete lack of remorse on the part of one of the criminals. In the spring of 2017, a series of shockingly brutal crimes shattered the tranquility of Lawrenceville, a quiet town nestled in the heart of Georgia. These gruesome events claimed the lives of 2 individuals and left 4 others gravely injured, hovering on the brink of death. Among the victims was an elderly couple who endured unimaginable torture and were ultimately beaten to death in a horrific act of violence motivated by greed. 2 college students, severely wounded in the spree, survived by sheer luck. The perpetrators of this chilling crime wave were 2 young lovers, 17-year-old Cassandra and 19-year-old Johnny Ryder. Their dark love story quickly captured the media's attention, drawing comparisons to the tragic romance of Romeo and Juliet. However, in a disturbing turn of events, their crime spree was even more horrific as their intended targets were members of their own families, people who once loved and cared for them. In a twisted plot, they sought to get rid of everyone close to them. Their romance began innocently enough, with a chance meeting in late January 2017 through mutual friends. Cassandra, 17 at the time, was still a student, while Johnny, just 19, was already nursing the emotional scars of a failed marriage. His brief marriage had been forced by circumstance when his underage girlfriend became pregnant. However, the pregnancy tragically ended early, and the marriage quickly fell apart. When Johnny first laid eyes on Cassandra, he was mesmerized, falling deeply and madly in love with her from the very first moment. Despite her petite, almost angelic appearance, Cassandra was a whirlwind of fierce, untamed energy. She had previously dedicated herself to intense physical pursuits, including competitive tango, taekwondo, and wushu. She was no stranger to martial arts competitions and showed promise in these fields. But her commitment waned as emotional turmoil took hold. In truth, it wasn't just emotional struggles that pulled her away from her athletic ambitions. She had become more drawn to the party scene, developing habits and behaviors that were in stark contrast to the disciplined lifestyle required for her sports. Her striking beauty and magnetic personality allowed her to captivate those around her, particularly the boys who were helplessly drawn into her orbit. Some now question whether Cassandra truly loved Johnny, or if she merely manipulated him to fulfill her own sinister desires. Yet one thing was clear: Johnny was utterly enthralled by her, blindly devoted and willing to do anything she asked, convinced that he had found his one true love and soulmate. At the time, Johnny was living at home with his mother and 2 sisters, while Cassandra lived with her doting grandparents, who cherished their only granddaughter. Not long after their fateful meeting, the young couple's passion for one another ignited into a full-blown affair. Eager to solidify their bond, they introduced each other to their respective families, hoping for acceptance and understanding. However, their families were far from approving. This rejection seemed to fuel a deep resentment within the couple, sparking a dangerous rage that would soon turn deadly. It's widely believed that neither Cassandra nor Johnny would have committed such heinous crimes on their own. But together, they became a deadly combination. Johnny, easily influenced and vulnerable to manipulation, was drawn into Cassandra's dark orbit. She became the mastermind behind the horrific events that followed, planting seeds of terrifying ideas that Johnny would carry out without hesitation. Cassandra Bjorg was born on January 18, 2000 in Peachtree Corners, Gwinnett County, Georgia. Raised by her single mother, Amanda Sterling, Cassandra never knew her biological father and had no contact with him throughout her life. Amanda, more absorbed in her own personal affairs than in parenting, struggled to provide the guidance and support her daughter desperately needed. This lack of stability at home contributed to Cassandra's early behavioral problems, and by a young age, she began exhibiting signs of aggression and defiance. When Cassandra turned 15, her mother married a man named Stephen. Unfortunately, this new chapter in their lives introduced further turmoil. Stephen began to show an unhealthy interest in Cassandra, making inappropriate advances toward her. Desperate for help, Cassandra confided in her mother, but Amanda dismissed her daughter's claims as fabrications. By then, Cassandra's reputation as a liar and troublemaker had taken root, and Amanda, believing her daughter was simply seeking attention, refused to believe her. Feeling abandoned by her mother, Cassandra turned to her grandparents, Wendy and Randall Bjorg, for help. Concerned for her well-being, Wendy and Randall took immediate action and invited Cassandra to live with them. In October 2015, Cassandra moved into their spacious two-story home in Lawrenceville, hoping for a fresh start. Her grandparents, who adored their only granddaughter, provided her with everything she needed, from a private room to unwavering emotional support. They believed that with enough love and care, Cassandra's troubling behavior would improve, and she would find her way back to a healthier path. However, Cassandra quickly took advantage of her grandparents' generosity. Instead of embracing the opportunity for a fresh start, she abandoned the sports and extracurricular activities she had once been involved in and began skipping school. She fell in with a bad crowd, frequently ran away from home, and started using alcohol and prohibited substances. Her behavior became increasingly volatile. Cassandra began stealing money from her grandparents, using it to fund her destructive habits. On one occasion, when her grandmother refused to give her the money she demanded, Cassandra lashed out, threatening her grandmother's life in a moment of blind rage. Between October 2015 and March 2017, Cassandra's escalating behavior resulted in more than 30 police calls from the Bjorga family. She would disappear for days, engage in physical altercations, steal from the house, and become uncontrollably aggressive under the influence of substances. Despite their efforts, her grandparents were unable to manage her erratic behavior. Still, Wendy and Randall held on to the hope that their granddaughter could be rehabilitated. They couldn't bring themselves to send her back to her mother or have her placed in juvenile detention, as they feared it would permanently ruin her life. Cassandra's descent into chaos accelerated after she met Johnny Ryder, a 19-year-old with a similarly troubled past. Their relationship only fueled Cassandra's instability, and soon, she tried to move Johnny into her grandparents' home. Wendy and Randall, already overwhelmed by their granddaughter's behavior, refused to allow it. This decision further strained their relationship with Cassandra, who became more defiant and reckless. The situation repeated itself when Johnny attempted to move Cassandra into his family's home, but his mother and sisters quickly shut down the idea and kicked the couple out. It was at this point that Cassandra and Johnny, feeling cornered and rejected by their families, decided to take matters into their own hands. They developed a dark and violent plan. Anyone who stood in the way of their relationship would be eliminated. The first step in their twisted scheme was to murder Cassandra's grandparents, steal their savings, and then target Johnny's family in a similar manner. Afterward, they intended to confront Cassandra's mother and stepfather, and once all obstacles were removed, they planned to flee to Florida with whatever money they could gather from their victims' homes. Cassandra knew her grandparents kept a significant amount of cash in their home, hidden in a safe on the second floor. However, after noticing that money had been disappearing and suspecting Cassandra of stealing, Wendy and Randall changed the combination to the safe, ensuring their granddaughter no longer had access to their funds. At the time, Wendy was 63 years old, and Randall had recently turned 65. The couple had been married for over 40 years and had built a life filled with love, stability, and comfort. They had raised a daughter, achieved their dream of owning a beautiful home, and looked forward to growing old together. They occupied 2 adjacent bedrooms on the second floor, each with its own bathroom, and despite Cassandra's increasingly erratic behavior, they held on to the belief that she could be saved. However, their unwavering belief in their granddaughter would prove fatal. On that fateful day, Cassandra and Johnny entered the home with murder on their minds. Armed with knowledge of where the cash was hidden but unable to access it without the safe's combination, they turned their frustrations into violence. The elderly couple, who had done nothing but love and care for Cassandra, became victims of the very person they had tried so hard to help. Their dream of growing old together was tragically cut short by the brutal actions of their granddaughter and her accomplice. Wendy and Randall had clung to the hope that they could change Cassandra's path. But in the end, their love and devotion were met with betrayal of the most unimaginable kind. Their desire to protect Cassandra from the harsh consequences of her actions had cost them their lives. What began as a plea for help from a troubled teenager ended in a horrific crime that left their once peaceful home drenched in tragedy. On the night of April 3, 2017, the quiet stillness of Wendy and Randall Bjorga's home was shattered by a horrific betrayal. The elderly couple had already gone to bed, unaware of the nightmare about to unfold. Cassandra Bjorga, their own granddaughter, led her boyfriend Johnny Ryder into the house. Armed with kitchen knives and baseball bats, the pair climbed the stairs to the second floor with sinister intent. Cassandra quietly entered her grandmother's room and stood by her bed while Johnny approached Randall and began striking him violently with the baseball bat. The elderly man, disoriented and frightened, didn't immediately understand what was happening. He was too stunned to defend himself as Johnny leapt onto the bed and continued the merciless assault, standing on his victim as he rained down blow after blow. Meanwhile, Wendy awoke to the dull, sickening thuds coming from the next room. As she tried to make sense of the sounds, she realized her granddaughter was standing beside her bed. Before Wendy could react, Cassandra stabbed her in the shoulder. Wendy, though in shock, tried to fight back. Her hands bore deep defensive cuts, but she was no match for her granddaughter's brutality. Cassandra dragged her by the hair into Randall's room, where Johnny was still viciously attacking her husband. Together, the young couple bound the elderly pair with tape and continued the assault, demanding the combination to the safe. Johnny pressed a knife to Randall's throat, threatening to kill him if they didn't comply. Yet even in the face of such cruelty, Wendy and Randall clung to the hope that their granddaughter wouldn't go through with her threats, believing she couldn't possibly kill her own family. But their hope was in vain. At Cassandra's command, Johnny began stabbing Randall in the stomach, showing no hesitation. Wendy, in a desperate plea for mercy, gave them the code to the safe. Cassandra, triumphant, ran to her grandmother's room, quickly opening the safe and finding thick envelopes stuffed with cash. She returned to Johnny, waving the money in the air, her excitement clear. But their greed wasn't satisfied with just the contents of the safe. The torture continued. Cassandra and Johnny, hungry for more, demanded the passwords to their bank cards, beating the elderly couple further to get what they wanted. It was during these final moments that Wendy and Randall seemed to realize they wouldn't be spared. They began saying their goodbyes, telling each other how much they loved one another, words that should have moved anyone with a conscience. But Cassandra later recounted this during her interrogation, coldly stating that the exchange of affection had amused her. Once they had all the information they needed, the young couple executed their final brutal act. They first killed Randall, stabbing him in the neck in front of Wendy, forcing her to watch as her husband died. Then, dragging Wendy into the bathroom, they continued their grisly work. Cassandra, in a display of twisted cruelty, bludgeoned her own grandmother with a baseball bat, hitting her over and over. At one point, frustrated that Wendy was still alive, Cassandra complained to Johnny that her grandmother wouldn't die. Johnny, eager to end it, then slit Wendy's throat, ensuring she had no chance of survival. After the murders, Cassandra and Johnny didn't flee the scene. Instead, they stayed in the house, living alongside the decomposing bodies of Wendy and Randall on the second floor. The stolen money gave them the means to indulge in their wildest fantasies. They bought alcohol, drugs, and anything else they desired, living in a haze of hedonism while the corpses of Cassandra's grandparents rotted upstairs. In their interrogations, the couple would later admit they wanted to try everything, and the money they stole allowed them to do just that. The thrill of their crime and the indulgence that followed seemed to give them no remorse. As days passed, Wendy's sister grew concerned. It had been several days since she had heard from Wendy, and despite sending text messages, there was no direct contact. The text messages she received were odd, especially since Wendy had poor eyesight and rarely used her phone for texting. The messages insisted everything was fine and reassured her not to worry, but they only heightened her anxiety. On April 5th, after repeated failed attempts to reach the Bjorkes, she called the police and requested a welfare check at their home. A patrol officer was sent to the house. At first glance, nothing seemed out of place. There were no signs of forced entry, the mail had been collected, and neighbors mentioned seeing the couple's car leaving for downtown that morning. The officer knocked on the door, but no one answered. Without a warrant, he had no authority to enter the home. Satisfied that everything appeared normal on the surface, the officer left, reporting that nothing suspicious had been found. Little did he know that inside the house, the bodies of Wendy and Randall Bjorga lay upstairs, while Cassandra and Johnny continued their macabre celebration amidst the spoils of their unspeakable crime. The horror wouldn't come to light until later, when further investigation would reveal the true extent of the brutality and betrayal that had unfolded behind closed doors. The young couple, reveling in the aftermath of their brutal crime, used the victim's car as their getaway vehicle, but not to flee, yet. Instead, they indulged in daily trips to buy food, alcohol, and other luxuries. They ordered takeout from restaurants, filling the house with boxes of uneaten spoiled food that littered every surface. Tables, windowsills, even the floor. The house, once a place of love and care, quickly turned into a scene of chaos and waste. Their insatiable greed meant that they soon ran out of cash, so they began withdrawing money from Wendy's bank card. But Randall's wallet, with its additional cards, remained elusive. A week after the murders, with their funds dwindling and reality closing in, Cassandra and Johnny concocted a wild plan. They decided to throw a party at the house, luring friends with the promise of money, alcohol, and illegal substances. However, they faced a gruesome obstacle. The decomposing bodies upstairs were emitting a stench so foul that it would be impossible to hide. Desperate, Johnny rummaged through the garage and found 2 cans of construction sealant. But before sealing the doors, they first had to mask the smell. They bought several liters of bleach from a hardware store and poured it over the bodies, a futile attempt to disinfect the scene. Then Johnny meticulously sealed every crack around the bathroom and bedroom doors, hoping the smell wouldn't escape. Despite their efforts, the odor still lingered, seeping through the cracks. When they called their friends to invite them, Cassandra spun a lie, claiming her grandparents had gone out of town, leaving her with plenty of money for a party. Yet her story raised eyebrows. Most of their friends were aware of how often Wendy and Randall had called the police to manage Cassandra's behavior, and the idea of the elderly couple leaving her alone seemed too far-fetched. In the end, only a handful of troubled teens showed up, lured by the promise of illegal substances and alcohol. Even in their intoxicated state, the guests complained about the overwhelming stench, which Cassandra casually blamed on a clogged sewer. The party was a shadow of what they had hoped for, a small gathering amidst the filth and decay of their crime. By the next day, Cassandra and Johnny realized they couldn't stay in the house any longer. The smell was unbearable, and the funds were nearly gone. It was time to leave, but they needed more money to execute their escape. This meant another gruesome plan, one that involved more of their relatives losing their lives. On Friday, April 8, 2017, the couple set their sights on Johnny's family home, planning to rob and murder his mother and sisters. Johnny, knowing their schedules well, used his keys to break in during the morning hours when the house was empty. They ransacked the place, finding some cash and valuables to tide them over. They armed themselves with baseball bats and bear spray, a highly potent aerosol designed to repel aggressive bears. Bear spray contains a powerful mix of tear and irritant substances that can cause severe burns, intense pain, and even be lethal to humans. Their plan was carefully thought out. They intended to attack Johnny's family members one by one as they returned home and eliminate any witnesses before fleeing. By the time anyone noticed his mother or sisters were missing, they hoped to have several days' head start. Johnny's younger sister, Melissa, was the first to come home from university that afternoon. However, to their dismay, she wasn't alone. Her boyfriend had come over to spend time with her while the house was empty. The unexpected presence of a second person threw a wrench in their plans. But the couple decided to press on, adding Melissa's boyfriend to their list of victims. As soon as the pair entered the house, they were alarmed by the mess and signs of a break-in. Realizing something was terribly wrong, Melissa ran to the phone to call the police, but before she could dial, the room filled with an acrid, burning orange cloud. The perpetrators had unleashed the bear spray, filling the air with a choking fog. Eyes stinging and throats burning, Melissa and her boyfriend struggled to see through the haze when Cassandra and Johnny appeared, armed with bats. The attackers swung their weapons wildly, but Melissa and her boyfriend fought back with unexpected ferocity. The situation quickly spiraled out of control. Cassandra and Johnny, overwhelmed by the strength of the bear spray themselves, began coughing uncontrollably, struggling to maintain their assault. In the chaos of the fight, the front door suddenly swung open, and Johnny's mother walked in, returning from work earlier than usual. She was horrified by the scene, her son and his girlfriend attacking her daughter and her daughter's boyfriend, who were struggling to breathe through the burning chemicals. Johnny's mother screamed and immediately called 911. Panicked, Cassandra and Johnny bolted, fleeing through the back door. In their rush, Cassandra dropped the keys to the stolen car they had been using, leaving behind critical evidence. Fortunately for them, Johnny had grabbed spare keys to his mother's car during the robbery, which they used to escape. However, they had abandoned the most damning piece of evidence, the vehicle registered to the late Randall Bjorga. The botched attack at the Ryder home was a pivotal moment. While the couple had hoped to carry out their deadly plan without a hitch, the arrival of an unexpected guest and their inability to control the situation forced them to flee before finishing what they had started. The couple was caught off guard when Melissa arrived home with her boyfriend. Their plan had been to silently attack one person at a time, but with two strong and alert individuals present, the situation became much more dangerous. Though the criminals immediately decided they had to eliminate this unexpected witness, their plan quickly fell apart. They overestimated their strength and severely underestimated the potency of the bear spray, which backfired on them. The attempted attack not only saved Johnny's family from a gruesome fate, but also marked the beginning of the end for the couple's murderous spree. Despite the vicious attack, both Melissa and her boyfriend survived, though they were hospitalized with varying degrees of injuries and chemical burns. When law enforcement arrived at the scene, one detail immediately stood out: the abandoned car in the backyard. The car didn't belong to the Ryder family, and when the police ran the license plates, they discovered it was registered to Randall and Wendy Bjorga. This revelation was disturbing because the police had already been called to the Bjorga's home earlier in the week for a welfare check. At that time, officers had knocked on the door but left when there was no response, assuming nothing was amiss. Now suspicious, the officers headed straight to the Bjorga residence. After repeated unsuccessful attempts to make contact, they forced the door open. The moment they entered, the unmistakable stench of decay hit them. It was coming from upstairs. In one of the bedrooms, they found bloodstains on the bed and floor, and the closet door was ajar, revealing an empty safe. However, the most disturbing discovery was still to come. The door to the master bedroom was sealed shut with construction adhesive, requiring the officers to cut through it with special tools. When they finally gained access, they were greeted with a nightmarish scene. On the floor lay the decomposing body of Randall Bjorga, his hands bound behind his back, clear signs of torture etched into his skin. Across the hall, the bathroom door had also been sealed. It took more time to break through, but inside, they found the remains of Wendy Bjorga. Her body bore the marks of a savage beating, and her throat had been viciously slit. The house itself was a disaster zone, filled with piles of trash, boxes, and spoiled takeout food, which had been left to rot. Empty alcohol bottles were scattered everywhere, and the sink overflowed with dirty dishes. The police, familiar with the Bjorga household, immediately connected the dots. Over the past year and a half, they had responded to multiple calls from Randall and Wendy regarding their troubled granddaughter, Cassandra, who often ran away, displayed aggressive behavior, and frequently got into trouble. Now she was the prime suspect in their brutal murders. As soon as Melissa and her boyfriend recovered enough to speak with the police, they pointed the finger at Cassandra, identifying her as the likely mastermind of the attack. They also mentioned Johnny, her boyfriend, who had been infatuated with her and would probably follow her lead in any crime. With their identities confirmed, Cassandra and Johnny were officially declared fugitives. The police quickly issued a warrant for their arrest, and an alert went out for the car they had escaped in. After fleeing the Ryder home, the pair stopped at a store to buy 5 liters of milk. The burning from the bear spray was excruciating, and they were desperate to wash it off. The milk helped ease the pain, but the couple knew they couldn't stay on the run forever without a plan. Johnny remembered his high school best friend Jason, who had been like a brother to him during their senior year. Though they had drifted apart after graduation, Johnny thought Jason might still be someone they could turn to for help. The criminals showed up at Jason's apartment unannounced. He was startled when his former classmate appeared at his door, looking disheveled and accompanied by a strange girl. Their appearance was alarming, but Johnny spun a sympathetic tale. He claimed that he and Cassandra had been thrown out after a heated argument with his mother, who didn't approve of his girlfriend. According to Johnny, things escalated when his mother sprayed them with pepper spray and forced them to leave with nothing. He begged Jason for a place to clean up and rest, as they had nowhere else to go. Jason and his mother, both kind-hearted people, felt sorry for the distressed couple. They allowed them to use the bathroom to shower, gave them clean clothes, and even prepared a meal for them. Grateful for the hospitality, Johnny and Cassandra accepted an invitation to spend the night. The next morning, Jason's mother made breakfast, serving coffee and chatting politely with the guests. She asked if there was anything more she could do to help, unaware of the dangerous criminals sitting at her kitchen table. But the peaceful morning wouldn't last long. As they finished their breakfast, the unmistakable sound of police sirens filled the air outside. Jason glanced out the window, puzzled, only to see several police cars pulling up directly outside the building. His confusion turned to alarm when a megaphone crackled to life, and officers began calling out Johnny and Cassandra's names, ordering them to surrender. At that moment, the couple knew their time was up. The law had finally caught up with them. Jason and his mother were paralyzed with shock as the reality of the situation sank in. Johnny, now gripping a large kitchen knife, coldly thanked them for their kindness and then, with an eerie calm, ordered them to leave the apartment immediately. Terrified and unsure of what the desperate couple might do next, Jason and his mother bolted for the door. Meanwhile, Johnny and Cassandra scrambled to barricade themselves inside the apartment. They had no intention of surrendering, believing their only escape was to take their lives together. Johnny and Cassandra knew they didn't have much time. A SWAT team would be breaking through the door any moment, and they realized they couldn't hold out for long. Deciding that a dramatic end was the only option, they retreated to the bathroom, knife in hand. There, in a final act of desperation, they inflicted several deep cuts on their wrists, hoping to bleed out quickly. As Johnny began to lose consciousness, he took out his phone and recorded a voice message for his mother. His voice, weak and filled with regret, apologized for everything. He expressed love for his family, lamenting the hurt he had caused, and said he was about to die in the arms of his beloved Cassandra. This would be his final message to the world. Cassandra, however, made no such attempts to reach out to anyone. She remained silent, never sending a message to friends or family. Her focus seemed entirely on herself. When the police finally broke down the door and entered the apartment, they found the young couple slumped together on the bathroom floor, unconscious and lying in each other's arms, surrounded by a massive pool of blood. They were barely alive, but alive nonetheless. Paramedics rushed in to provide immediate medical care, stabilizing them before rushing them to the hospital. As soon as Johnny regained consciousness in the hospital, his first words were not of remorse, but concern for Cassandra, asking repeatedly if she was okay. Once stabilized, he was quick to confess his involvement in the crimes, expressing sorrow for what he had done. His confessions seemed sincere. They were filled with regret for the lives he had taken and the people he had hurt. Cassandra, on the other hand, adopted a completely different approach. She painted herself as a victim of her boyfriend's influence, claiming she had been dragged into everything against her will. She blamed her depression and anger toward life for her actions, using her mental health as a crutch. But as she recounted the events in more detail, she slipped up, accidentally admitting that she had long harbored a desire to see her grandparents dead. Her behavior during interrogations shocked even the most seasoned detectives. She alternated between childish whining about the hospital food and flirtatious attempts to manipulate the officers. When she finally agreed to talk, it was only after they brought her fast food from her favorite restaurant. What she said next froze the blood in the veins of the police. When asked why she had killed her grandparents, Cassandra replied with chilling indifference, "They had lived long enough." She explained that they were a nuisance to her, interfering with her freedom, making her go to school, and hiding money she felt entitled to. Cassandra displayed no remorse for taking the lives of the only people who had ever truly cared for her. The only regret she expressed was that she hadn't been able to find her grandfather's bank card. When detectives revealed that her grandfather had hidden his wallet under his pillow out of fear she would steal it, Cassandra laughed and said, "Grandpa was always damn smart." The couple also confessed to planning the murders of Johnny's family. They wanted revenge on the Riders for not accepting Cassandra and for trying to break up the couple, thinking Cassandra was a bad influence. They also planned to rob the family, coldly justifying their actions by stating, "Dead people don't need money." Afterward, they intended to kill Cassandra's mother and stepfather, driven by a desire to punish them for how they had mistreated her. Their ultimate plan was to flee to Florida, where they dreamed of living by the ocean, spending the stolen money, and enjoying a carefree life. Months later, Johnny and Cassandra faced each other once more, but this time in the courtroom. The passion and loyalty that had once defined their relationship had evaporated. Instead, they spent most of the trial blaming each other, arguing, and hurling insults across the courtroom. Whatever twisted bond had existed between them had shattered under the weight of their crimes. Both ultimately pleaded guilty to all charges, including the murders of Cassandra's grandparents, the attack on Melissa and her boyfriend, and the robberies they had committed. The court found Cassandra Bjorga and Johnny Ryder guilty on all counts. Each was sentenced to 2 life sentences, with the possibility of parole after 60 years. In the aftermath, Johnny showed genuine remorse, standing up in court to apologize to everyone he had wronged, his voice trembling as he took full responsibility for the horror he had helped unleash. Cassandra, in stark contrast, remained defiant until the very end. When given the chance to speak, she coldly said, "I have nothing to apologize for." With that, the case of the 2 young criminals came to a close, but the damage they had done would haunt their victims and their families for a lifetime.